It was a picture that stayed in my mind for one lifetime.
It's your baby now.
Yeah.
It's your baby.
Oh my, what a treat. What a memory, what a beautiful memory now. Then we look out together, I get my left hand.
And I'll get my right hand.
And you get your right there, yeah. This way, we're ready. This means start the engine.
This is a story about a remarkable leader, a remarkable aviator, and a remarkable airplane. We call the story The Gifts of History.
Go for auto sequence start. Discovery's onboard computers have primary control. 2, 1, booster ignition, and liftoff.
The space shuttle used to travel, around the world, around Earth, every hour and a half. It makes the world much smaller. I know you've heard that before, but it really hits you. It really, really makes the world a lot smaller. And that's actually a pleasure. That is really, I cannot wait for the time, the day when everybody can go to space.
Among all people on this earth, there exists a planetary thread of intelligence. It is from this global intelligence that the gifts of history arise and are recognized. King Abdulaziz recognized a vision for his people of Saudi Arabia. Abdulaziz began to reunite the kingdom in 1902 with the retaking of Riyadh. His next challenge was to unite the people of the entire peninsula. Many were nomadic tribal members belonging to various connected tribes. Abdulaziz then moved to settle these nomadic peoples into villages by giving them added opportunities and incentives, such as water wells and a connection of central services and food stops. Once this was done, his next challenge was to unite the villages together and create a sense of nationhood. Initially, Abdulaziz established his rule over the lands by bringing tribes together through matrimonial unions with tribal women, much as the kingdoms of Europe were united through marriages. Most countries unite their urban centers with waterways, roads, and eventually railroads. In a country as large as Saudi Arabia, it would have been a massive and expensive undertaking. However, at just the right moment, Abdulaziz received a gift that he wisely used as a tool to help him unite the country. That gift was a DC-3 airplane from Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
As a young student of about 7 in grade school in Jeddah, a school called the Al-Saudiya School, we were taken walking from the school, which was not very far away from the old gate called the Bund Gate in Jeddah, to witness the departure of the late King Abdulaziz on a boat owned by the British consulate in Jeddah to the USS Murphy, which carried him to the Saltbitter Lake to meet with President Roosevelt in '45, just before the president died, a few months before, I think. And the meeting took place on the USS Quincy. So he moved from the Murphy to the Quincy and met the president. So we were taken there and we sang a song that the school taught us on that occasion for the king. It said that Abdulaziz of the clan of the Al Saud, who saved the country from the poverty it was undergoing. It rhymes in Arabic, but that was the first verse and I can't remember the others.
February of 1945, Franklin Delano Roosevelt President of the United States and King Abdulaziz met to negotiate the shape of the post-war world and attempt to shape the future to their national interests. Their meeting was brief, some 5 or 6 hours of conversation. They found each other congenial company, a kind of like-mindedness, as King Abdulaziz is reported to have said.
And I'll tell you, the king, when he came aboard the ship, he went right to President Roosevelt. There was no hesitation. They both headed off good.
It was amazing to see for an 18-year-old kid to see all these important people. Well, when the destroyer came in sight, that's when I learned that the King of Arabia was on there. My job was to handle the lines to tie up the destroyer Murphy to come alongside us to tie him up, and we did that. So I was on the stern of the Quincy, and they had gifts for the crew of the Quincy. And what they were melons, a whole bunch of melons, and they would be throwing them up from the destroyer stern up to us as gifts from the Saudis.
We were detached from the division and went down through the Suez Canal to Jeddah, and then of course we found out what we were doing by that time, and we embarked the king and the 48 members of his party. I was up on the bow during most of the operation, so I could see from the ship where President Roosevelt and the king were having their chat.
The king was escorted aboard to meet the president and the other guests. Colonel William A. Eddy, retired Marine officer and American minister to Saudi Arabia, acted as interpreter. Colonel Eddy had grown up in the Middle East and was fluent in Arabic.
He was the right man in the right place at a very appropriate time. He would certainly be proud the cultural bonds between nations, in this particular case, the United States and Saudi Arabia. But the job of all of us is to learn the facts and go and tell the world, wassalamu alaikum.
During their meeting, the president shared with the king his spare wheelchair. But Roosevelt wanted to give King Abdulaziz a greater gift, to acknowledge their personal friendship and the link between the two nations. That gift was a top-of-the-line and our best, a DC-3. The DC-3 arrived in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia just 2 days following Franklin Roosevelt's death, and just over a week since the final correspondence between the two leaders. Colonel William A. Eddy formally presented the airplane to Prince Mansour, who was the son of King Abdulaziz and also the defense minister of Saudi Arabia. Prince Mansour spoke for the kingdom, saying, "The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will value this gift for many reasons, in addition to its valuable service and transportation. It will always recall the giver, your late president, for whom His Majesty conceived unparalleled admiration. It will knit more firmly the strands of friendship between our nations as it weaves its way back and forth over our land, guided by American hands." Since the first meeting with FDR and King Abdulaziz, there were many important meetings with the kings of Saudi Arabia and the presidents of the United States.
I speak as one who has been to Saudi Arabia many times. King Abdullah and I are old friends, and I share a desire to see our personal friendship reflected in the citizenry of our two great nations.
We gather here to honor the President and the King, and to recommit ourselves to the spirit of the first meeting, the spirit of hope and respect grounded in common interests.
As much as the DC-3 was the right airplane for King Abdulaziz's vision for the kingdom, it needed the right pilot. Joe Grant was chosen for this task.
We began to wind down the European War, and President Roosevelt and Churchill, they were all busy, we were all busy romancing the Saudis because of oil, you know. And I have no idea why they gave me the job. I assume that they were looking after the king and the royal family's safety. So I was just told in Washington that I was to pick up the airplane in Cairo and report to King Abdulaziz ibn Saud down in Saudi Arabia. The old three had no limit to what it would carry, as you remember. It quite an airplane. Well, the first place we landed was Jeddah, where we refueled, and the next day we went to Riyadh. Now, in Riyadh, we were given quarters right in the royal palace, and I guess that palace is still there today.
Aircraft had been utilized in the kingdom previously, but the DC-3 was a different breed of airplane. Developed to fly passengers in unprecedented comfort and style, the DC-3 also had speed and range. Early in 1946, negotiations were carried out with TWA, then Transcontinental and Western Airlines, to turn over the job of flying the plane to civilian pilots.
TWA bought the DC-3s, so they started hiring pilots. You know, it was like the old days. You just picked a spot wherever, including Riyadh, where we pick a spot to land and roll our wheels on the ground, make sure it's solid, come back around then and set our wheels right down there and bring it to a stop and then walk it out, and that's our airport.
The king needed a pilot who could take him any place, who would look at the kind of flying he was going to have to do. As Joe Grant said himself, it was fun, like the old barnstorming days, going places where there weren't any landing strips or navigational aids of the time.
I was the chief pilot, and I was the manager, and I was having a lot of responsibility, but I wasn't aware of it. I was just doing my job. And to set up an airline without airports is something, it's unbelievable. But all of I got the pilots right out of the war, you know, when they were released. These are all well trained DC-3 pilots. I'd bring these pilots down there. Typical Americans, you know, we love challenges. So here they are. And these guys were just great guys.
Captain Bob Morgan also piloted the King with Joe Grant in the early days.
When we went to Saudi Arabia, the only thing we had over the Wright brothers, we had a modern aircraft. There was no paved runways, no navigational facilities, just sand.
But the King realized, with Joe's assistance, that there was an opportunity to further unite all those villages by setting up airports and letting people fly and meet each other through aviation. Saudi Arabia could bypass roads and railroads. The King subsidized aviation travel in those days, so it was affordable. This allowed opportunity to connect the people to take place that would not have happened otherwise. So they began the concept of a civil aviation system for Saudi Arabia, which became Saudi Arabian Airlines eventually. In the process, they united much of the country.
So this king's vision laddered down through step by step to where we are today.
Or you couldn't help but admire him from and the more you saw him, the more admiration you would have for him. I can understand. He was not only a king in name, he was a man
of the people.
Joe spent 2 years in Saudi Arabia flying the DC-3 for the royal family. He started out by flying the DC-3 to Jeddah. King Abdulaziz's son, Prince Faisal, later King Faisal, and his entourage were with Joe on that first flight, introduced him to a world he did not know. Joe said, "No words can adequately describe the people who gave me such wonderful memories. Their warmth and generosity lives in my heart. It is a gift that has stayed with me." Joe Grant also recognized a vision. The vision was the establishment of Saudi Arabia's first national airline and the training of its pilots. When Saudi Arabian Airlines was started in 1946, the vision for the airline was twofold: to carry people, mail, and cargo within the kingdom, and to increase the ability of Muslims to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. Saudi Arabian Airlines today has grown into the largest airline in the region and one of the major world airlines. The kingdom operates 6 international airports, 6 regional airports, and 14 domestic airports. In addition, Aramco runs a number of their own airports. The late Crown Prince Sultan bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, first Deputy Premier and Minister of Defense and Aviation and Inspector General, was the founder of modern Saudi aviation and Saudi Air Force. The original gift DC-3 airplane served the king and the kingdom until 1977, a 32-year span, clocking some 32,000 hours. For 10 years following its retirement, the airplane sat out on the runway. In 1987, it was decided that the airplane should be turned into a static display, and it underwent the first of 2 restorations and was stored at Riyadh Air Force Base. In 1999, another restoration was undertaken by the El Salam Aircraft Company and the Boeing Corporation, this time to return SAR-1 to flying condition. The airplane now takes pride of place in the Sakhr Al Jazeera Air Museum in Riyadh.
This seat is where His Majesty sit down, right here.
So here is King Abdulaziz. He was sitting and he
Right
was
there. That's it. He put his hand right here on my shoulder. Yeah, when he got in.
And what did he say?
Well, he had a smile. He didn't
just had a
say
smile.
much.
He didn't
Yeah.
say anything.
No, he just had a smile.
In 2006, after 65 years of absence, Joe Grant, his wife, and crew members of the USS Quincy and the USS Murphy returned to Saudi Arabia. Invited by the government of Saudi Arabia, this delegation made history again with their visit to the kingdom. Upon arrival in Saudi Arabia, they were whisked around the country meeting members of the royal family, government officials, Saudi Arabian Airlines personnel, and other dignitaries throughout the kingdom. A highlight of Joe's visit was being greeted by His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Abdulaziz, at that time the governor of Riyadh and currently the Crown Prince. This meeting was very important, and Prince Salman recalled that his last visit with Joe was at age 10, which was a vivid memory. Another highlight was a visit to Sakhr Al Jazeera Museum at the Riyadh Air Base, which housed FDR's gift to the king, the original DC-3 restored aircraft.
And this was the best we had to offer. When President Roosevelt gave His Majesty this airplane, you know, that's the best we had. We landed all over the desert with this airplane.
You remember opening the window here?
Well, it still worked.
Wow. So
Yeah.
you remember, you still remember.
Still worked. I remember sticking my head out here when we first arrived at Saudi Arabia. Oh my, is it something? What a memory, what a beautiful memory now. But this is and here's the good thing. Just think now, these pilots now are just as good as anyone in the world. They've proven it over and over now. And look at the job they do running Saudi Airlines. What a beautiful job. Well organized, well managed, and whatever they do it so well. I'm so proud to say that I was a little bit to the beginning and to see what they've really accomplished.
On his return to Saudi Arabia, Joe found the cities transformed, but Saudi traditions unchanged. Joe said, "What a wonderful culture. I don't know whether the king awakened a culture that was already there, or if he just perfected a culture that existed. Joe and the Quincy and Murphy crews were presented special awards. Joe Grant wrote in the museum's guest book, "A great museum made possible by the pilots of a great country. I am proud to be a member with these great pilots. Credit to the great king who have followed King Abdulaziz and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It is an honor to be given another look at the Royal DC-3 airplane at this wonderful museum. God bless the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia." In May of 2009, His Royal Highness Prince Sultan bin Salman graciously sponsored Captain Joe Grant's return to Saudi Arabia for the last time. Joe was then 101 years old. The king greeted Joe, his family, and group at his farm in Janadria. Their eyes had not met in over 6 decades. When the king first saw Joe, he said, "Joseph, your face is still the same." Earlier in the year, Joe was awarded the King Abdulaziz Medal First Class on behalf of His Majesty King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz. The King Abdulaziz Medal First Class is the highest civilian medal awarded by Saudi Arabia and is awarded in recognition of significant contributions made by an individual to the kingdom. During his stay, he was hosted and presented gifts at the homes and offices of His Royal Highness Prince Bandar bin Abdulaziz, Prince Badr bin Abdulaziz, His Royal Highness Prince Naif bin Abdulaziz, His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Fahad bin Abdulaziz, His Royal Highness Prince Mukran bin Abdulaziz. Captain Grant was also previously hosted at the office of His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Abdulaziz. He also visited with a number of other Saudi princes and senior officials. While meeting the senior princes, they reminded Joe of the trials and tribulations of flying in Saudi Arabia in those early days of aviation. Stories abounded as the princes recalled flights throughout the kingdom. Prince Badr bin Abdulaziz recalled an incident when Captain Grant was assigned by King Abdulaziz to pick up his mother, who was ill in an outlying district. She was to be transported back to Riyadh to receive immediate medical care, and the young Prince Badr flew on the plane with Joe. As Joe was preparing to land on his return to Riyadh, he attempted to lower the landing gear, but only one wheel came down. He recalled that Joe had to try an emergency landing procedure, whereby he would come down and bounce the one wheel off the desert and hope the action would free the other wheel and send it down. It worked. Joe then lifted the plane back into the air, made another pass, and safely landed his precious DC-3 with all the passengers intact. "You saved our lives," said Prince Badr. Joe's comment when he heard this and other similar stories was, "I was just doing my job." All had fond memories of their time in the DC-3 with Joe. For most of them, it was their first meeting with an American, and they all commented on his friendliness and kindness with them.
Over and over and over. And now, and also, I said, listen, he may be a prince, but I'll tell you, number one, he's a pilot.
I think you got that right.
Yeah.
In 2009, Captain Joe Grant was invited as an honored guest to the Experimental Aircraft Association annual conference, popularly known as the Oshkosh Air Show, the largest and most famous North American air show. A recreation of the gifting of the DC-3 by President Roosevelt to King Abdulaziz took place with great fanfare. In addition, at the ceremony were the grandsons of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz, Delano Roosevelt, and Prince Sultan bin Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. Also present on the flight were Grant's son and grandson, Edward and Michael. Steve Taylor, president of Boeing Business Jets, Ken Hoffman, former president of the Experimental Aviation Association, and Michael Saba.
To have Joe with his great wisdom, I have learned so much from this man over the last few years. Talking just now on the airplane, he was looking at me and saying, the only way to live longer and be happier is to keep flying.
A large part of this reenactment was in support of several charities that work with handicapped children. Prince Sultan heads up groups in Saudi Arabia devoted to disabled children.
Aviation, ability. I spoke in Saudi Arabia a couple of months ago in our organization, the largest organization for enabled people. And we said we're not going to call them disabled people anymore. We're going to call them the enabled people. President Roosevelt is an example of that, a great president that is my favorite, if you like. You know, and I hope this event will take place over and over. I told Joe that we should be planning really over the next 30 years, some of the events coming up over the next 30 years.
The following day, Captain Joe Grant was honored again at the annual Gathering of the Eagles closing event banquet. Presided over by famous actor and pilot Harrison Ford, Joe was given a special award and delivered a keynote speech to the hundreds in the audience. Joined on the podium by Prince Sultan and Delano Roosevelt, they jointly presented a special edition copy of King Abdulaziz, his plane and his pilot, mounted in a case created from a wooden vintage propeller. As Ford browsed through a copy of the book and saw the pictures of Joe, King Abdulaziz, and early aviation in the kingdom, he stated, "You are much more like Indiana Jones than I am. This is a cherished gift from you and the people of Saudi Arabia." At a post-reception following the banquet, Joe was met and honored by celebrity pilots, Academy Award winner Cliff Robertson, hotel magnate William Barron Hilton, a pilot of 63 years, Bob Hoover, a good friend and colleague of Joe Grant for many years, and known as one of the founding fathers of modern aerobatics, and has been described as the greatest stick and rudder man who ever lived, and brothers Dick and Burt Rutan, known for their 28,000-mile first non-stop and non-refueled flight around the world, as well as Spaceships 1 and 2, designed to be the first commercial aircraft going into space. Earlier that day, Joe met Captain Chelsea Sully Sullenberger and First Officer Jeff Skiles, who famously ditched an Airbus A320 with 155 people on board in the Hudson River in January without losing a single life. Now that was a piece of real piloting, said Grant. With Joe's history, he knew. Joe was honored for his service in Saudi Arabia at the Smithsonian Museum of Air and Space shortly after his stint at Oshkosh. Joe and Saudi Aviation were also honored at a ceremony held in the Glenn L. Martin, Maryland Aviation Museum, as well as the Parker T. Hart Award for fostering Saudi-U.S. relations and friendship. Joe's year was capped with another special award given only to achievers of at least 100 years of age, the National Centenarian Awareness Project Award. "What a wonderful honor," stated Grant. "I cherish my work and friendship with King Abdulaziz, and to be recognized with a medal bearing his name is very special to me." Following the Oshkosh Air Show of 2009 and the center stage visit of Joe Grant in the vintage DC-3 with Saudia livery, EAA officials made a decision to gather as many existing DC-3s as possible for the 2010 Air Show. It was also the year of the 75th anniversary of the DC-3. The inspiration for the event was Joe Grant and his beloved Saudi DC-3, which served King Abdulaziz and the people of Saudi Arabia. Captain Joe Grant was invited to fly into the 2010 Oshkosh Air Show with the formation of DC-3s. Joe was to be a featured guest and participant. However, in early 2010, his health took a turn for the worse. Joe was a man of great wisdom and intelligence. At 102, he was still dispensing great philosophy and coining new terms. He spoke of always doing the best that one can and staying positive. However, one of the final thoughts Joe shared was about sweet memories of friends and colleagues that had gone before him. He especially spoke of memories of His Majesty King Abdulaziz and his eagerness to meet him again. One of Joe's last quotes was, "Whatever you do, stay happy." Located on the edge of the Oshkosh Airport stands the Memorial Wall. This structure provides a dignified place for families and friends to remember and honor their loved ones and pioneers in aviation. Joe Grant's work with King Abdulaziz and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is part of this memorial. On April 27, 2010, Joe Grant, at age 102, passed away. Joe Grant and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia were not forgotten at Oshkosh 2010. When the DC-3 formation flew overhead, one could feel the sadness of Joe's absence. There was an aircraft missing that should have been leading the formation, with a special person in one of the pilot seats. King Abdulaziz and Captain Joe Grant have left an aviation legacy together.
We could put it many different ways, but certainly it was great that he came along just at the right time for the good, not only the good of just Saudi Arabia, but for the good of the world. It's apparent not only was he a warrior, but a great man of foresight. Any thinking person can't help but come to that conclusion because it was his philosophy that is still in so many hearts and minds of the very people who are making Saudi Arabia the greatest, one of the greatest countries in the world.
Solid rocket booster separation confirmed. Guidance now converging. Discovery's onboard computers commanding the main engine nozzles to swivel, aiming the shuttle for its precise target in space for main engine cutoff.